On the night of September 17th, 1898, Sarah Ware disappeared. 2 weeks later, her decomposing body was discovered in the brush off Miles Lane in Bucksport. However, as is often the case in Maine, this is not where her story ended. More than a century after her death, a scuba diver exploring Silver Lake reported a chilling encounter in its murky depths. How could these two events possibly be connected? Bucksport, Maine, 1898. A quiet river town, but not necessarily a sleepy one. Most mornings you would hear the mills before you'd see the sun. Saw blades whining, men shouting over the Penobscot's wind. The river was the town's lifeline. Everything came or went by water. You'd see schooners tied up at the wharf, their decks stacked with lumber bound for Bangor or Boston, and the smell of fresh-cut timber hung over the whole waterfront. Main Street was a mix of brick and weathered clapboard, nothing fancy, but solid. The shops opened early: hardware, dry goods, the apothecary, and folks knew each other well enough that gossip traveled faster than the mail coach. The sidewalks were still mostly dirt, so after a rain you would track half the town home on your boots. Life was steady, predictable. Church bells marked the week, and the mills marked the seasons. Winter bit hard, but people were used to it. Summers brought visitors drifting up from the coast, curious about Fort Knox across the river. The town was not rich, but they got by. Fishing, logging, ship work, honest trades. And when the river fog rolls in thick and white, swallowing the far shore, Bucksport could feel like the whole world was just this one bend in the Penobscot, and always had been. Born in Nova Scotia in 1846, Sarah MacDonald grew up in a poor family, but carried with her a stubborn hope for something better. She dreamed of crossing the border into the United States, imagining opportunity waiting somewhere beyond the coast. Sometime in the 1860s, she made that dream real and arrived in the small riverside town of Bucksport, Maine. Bucksport was an industrial hub with a busy waterfront. Lumber companies crowded the shoreline, while carriage makers and shipbuilders kept the town's economy humming. Not far away, construction was still underway on Fort Knox. It was a place full of noise, hard labor, and possibility. And Sarah quickly found herself enamored with it. Before long, she met and fell in love with a local undertaker, Charles W. Ware. The two married in 1869 and had 3 children together, though one died young. Many say this tragedy marked the beginning of a rift between them, a quiet fracture that never fully healed. Once their 2 surviving children were grown, Sarah made the bold decision to leave Charles, a choice that at the time was heavily frowned upon. But Sarah was known for her fierce independence. She refused to be constrained by social expectations, and though the couple separated, they remained amicable enough in public life. Sarah was well known around town and had many friends in the community. She supported herself with odd jobs, babysitting, cleaning houses, whatever work she could find. Among the people she grew close to was a local stove maker, William Trewargy. She began working for him and eventually moved into his home as a sort of live-in nanny for his 2 daughters. For a time, she seemed content. She kept the house, cared for the girls, and settled into a routine. Then, abruptly, she quit and left. Speculation spread quickly. Some whispered about unwanted advances, others about a lover's quarrel. But Sarah never explained. She simply moved on. She soon found lodging with a friend, though she stayed in touch with the Trewargy girls. They visited her each Sunday, and when their father arrived to pick them up, Sarah often invited him in for dinner if time allowed. Their relationship was complicated, but outwardly cordial. September 17th, 1898, began like any other day. Sarah shared a light breakfast with her friend, Almira Miles, while William and another man, Winfield Patterson, worked in the garden out front. As Sarah prepared to go grocery shopping, a knock sounded at the door. It was Trewargy. She greeted him politely, and he asked to speak to Almira. The 3 discussed a payment arrangement they had made. William would receive vegetables in exchange for work he had done for Miss Miles. They agreed the quantities were fair, and Almira stepped back inside, leaving Sarah alone with him. Moments later, the conversation erupted into shouting. No one knows exactly what the argument was about. Winfield believed it had to do with money. Others suspected something more personal, given their history. The truth may never be known. Sarah eventually returned indoors, and the 2 men left the property. She and Almira then went to visit a friend before Sarah continued on to the market for groceries. After dropping them off at home, she dressed carefully. A black dress with a large ruffle, a dark brown waist, a cape-like shawl, and a felt hat with matching gloves. She told Almira she was just going to visit another friend, John Baldoch. It was a cool night for the season, and the weather was beginning to turn. Almira urged her friend to stay in, but Sarah, never one to be dissuaded, reassured her, gave her a hug, and clutching her purse under her arm, stepped out into the night. In the short timeline that followed, she was seen walking downtown, pausing for a moment to stare out over the water, before continuing on to John's. From there, she went to Fogg's General Store to buy a couple of cigars. At 9 p.m., neighbors saw her walking down the street. At 9:15, she was spotted near a bridge. That was the last time anyone saw Sarah Ware alive. Sarah was known to be a bit aloof, and while her friend Almira did begin to worry when she realized Sarah hadn't returned home, she convinced herself that Sarah must have decided to stay the night elsewhere. It wouldn't have been unusual. Sarah often disappeared for days or even weeks at a time when she was working for someone. Still, something about this absence didn't sit right with Almira. The next morning, she asked Mr. Trevorgy to go and check on Sarah at John's house. He returned saying no one had been home. The Blue Hill Fair was coming the following week, a celebration that drew people from all over the region, and everyone in the community attended. If Sarah was around, she would almost certainly appear there. But nearly a week later, the fair came and went, and still, Sarah Ware never showed. That was when people began to wonder. Sarah was well known in town, and while it wasn't unusual for her to go unseen for stretches of time, this was different. Then one day, while William Trevorgy was doing work for another woman, the subject of Sarah's disappearance came up. William claimed that Sarah was dead and that a search party would soon be forming to find her, even adding that he planned to join them. The woman was alarmed. She had been under the impression that Sarah was simply missing. When she pressed him for more information, William tried to change the subject, but the damage was done. Later that day, after finally hearing through word of mouth about the missing woman, the deputy sheriff questioned Almira and organized a group to begin searching for Sarah. Among those gathered was John. Notably, William Trevorgy was absent. They didn't find her that day, but it wouldn't be long. On the morning of October 2nd, at around 10:45 a.m., a volunteer stumbled across the remains of Sarah Ware, lying in a pasture not far from Miles Lane. News spread through town almost instantly, and soon much of Bucksport had gathered at the small plot. The deputy eventually had to call for reinforcements to manage the growing crowd and secure the scene. Witnesses described the condition of Sarah's body as deeply disturbing. Her face had been severely damaged by animals, leaving her features almost unrecognizable. Much of her jaw and cheekbone were missing, though her scalp and long dark hair remained intact. Her body appeared to have been arranged. Her cape was folded beneath her clothing stained, and her arms placed over her chest. It appeared her skull had been crushed, a detail later confirmed by physicians. Her throat had been cut with such force and repetition that her head was barely connected to the rest of her body. When investigators attempted to remove her remains, the advanced decay gave way, and the head separated entirely, dropping to the dirt with a dull finality. The remains were carefully gathered and secured as evidence. Nearby, a knife lay half buried in the leaf litter beside her scattered belongings, including a purse that was also collected for examination. Doctors examining the body disagreed on the cause of the injuries. One suggested they might have been accidental, perhaps the result of a fall onto a sharp rock, while others strongly rejected that idea, insisting the wounds indicated foul play. Detectives soon questioned Treewargy at his home. He denied any involvement and claimed he had no reason to harm Sarah. But evidence found in his shed suggested otherwise. Investigators discovered a stained tarp and a hammer marked with William's initials. He claimed they were tools used for slaughtering an animal, but later examination confirmed the substance on them to be human blood. It was the break the police needed. Although there were several potential suspects in town, the investigation quickly focused on Treewargy after Joseph Fogg Jr. came forward. He claimed William had paid him to help move Sarah's body to the pasture where it was found. Joseph described the events of September in detail, shocking those who heard him. He also claimed that after the job was done, William threatened him, warning that if he ever spoke of it, he would go the same way. His testimony conflicted with the account of Winfield Patterson, who stated he had stayed at the Treewargy home on the night in question and heard no indication that William had left the property. The case grew even more tangled when Joseph recanted his statement, only to reverse himself again days later. He said he had been threatened and bullied by people on both sides and feared for his safety. The case soon gained national attention. Newspapers across the country ran stories about the brutal murder in a small Maine town. Finally, on July 30th, 1902, nearly 4 years after Sarah's death, a verdict was reached. Not guilty. A jury of 12 acquitted William Treewargy of all charges. Many in Bucksport believed the case had been mishandled, some even claiming it had been rigged. But life moved on. The site where her body was found is now a parking lot, forgotten by most. Even more tragically, while most of her body was buried in a pauper's grave, her head was somehow lost. The skull remained at the Hancock County Courthouse until 1998, when it was finally laid to rest. But this is not where Sarah's story ends. Not long after Sarah's death, Almira claimed she was visited by her friend's spirit. She often heard knocking and other strange noises in the house, calling out only to be met with silence. Before long, Others around town began reporting sightings of Sarah in familiar places. Her old home, the Trevorgy residence, and even her original burial site on the shores of Silver Lake. Not far from where Sarah Ware met her tragic end lies the serene and deceptively peaceful Silver Lake, a man-made reservoir constructed in 1930 to supply water to the nearby paper mill. It spans roughly 600 acres and once served as a vital part of Bucksport's infrastructure. Today, though privately owned, it is surrounded by hiking trails frequented by locals and visitors alike. It was on one of these trails that my friend Nomar Slevik had an experience of his own. He wrote about it in his book Humanoid Encounters, where he goes into far more detail than I can here. Fortunately, Nomar was kind enough to share his account with us directly, so I'll step aside and let him tell it in his own words.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on. I appreciate it, and I'm just going to jump right into it. In October of 2021, I was doing some research on haunted trails near my home. I was looking for some interesting locations where I could ride my bicycle. I found the old narrow gauge trail in Raymond, which involved the murder of a local. His nickname was Bicycle Larry, and his ghost reportedly haunts the trail. But I also found some information on the Silver Lake trails in Bucksport. To my surprise, people have claimed to see the headless ghost of Sarah Ware wandering the pathways. I visited the area on October 28th, 2021. While there, I discovered a picnic area just off the main path. I decided to sit at the table and conduct an EVP session. After about 15 minutes, I noticed a woman running down the main trail. She appeared to be about 5'6", maybe 5'8", with long brown hair tied back in a ponytail. What struck me most was the complete silence of her movement. With it being October and the ground covered in leaves, I didn't hear a single sound as she passed by. Then, as suddenly as she appeared, she vanished. Had I just seen the ghost of Sarah Ware? Maybe it was another presence. I don't know. Without hesitation, I hurried to the main trail and looked up and down in both directions, and nobody was there. I did record myself down in this section when I was conducting the EVP session, and I do have that audio. The following is what I experienced in real time.
Sarah, or anybody that might be around, I'm inviting you over to the picnic table. Come sit down with me and let's talk. Wind's picking up a bit. Sarah, can you tell us what happened to you? Just saw somebody else. I don't know. Let's see what this is. Well, that was weird. So I'm sitting in this clearing. You have to turn into it and go into the woods a little bit from the trail. So there's a little thicket of woods between this clearing and the trail. And through the trees, where I've got a clear shot of the trail, somebody just walked by on the trail. And looking at the opening they're maybe 15 feet apart, and I should have seen somebody emerge. I also didn't hear them. I'm probably 20 feet from the trail, and I didn't even hear the leaves crunching because it's obviously just before Halloween, and the woods are littered with leaves. And I didn't hear any crunching from somebody walking or jogging. And I say jogging because it went by kind of fast, but it was clearly a person. Person with a head. But they didn't continue down the trail. So that means if it is a real person, they're hiding in this thicket right by the opening of the clearing because they're insane. They know I'm here and want to attack me. Or it's some sort of otherworldly being, whether that's a ghost or whatever you want to call it, you know?
To this day, the tragedy of Sarah Ware's story remains a haunting reminder of a life cut short. Her murder is still technically unsolved, and her presence is felt to this day. Whether it is through whispered legends, spectral encounters, or the enduring memory of her name, Sarah's story refuses to fade. Perhaps she lingers, waiting for the truth to finally come to light. Or maybe she's just simply reminding us not to forget her. Thank you so much, Reverend Redbeard, for having me on and to share my little story of my encounter with Sarah.
Thanks again, Nomar, for coming on the show. He was a great source for this episode, and he does a fantastic job covering this case in his book, so I highly recommend picking it up if you'd like to dive a little deeper. Over the decades since Sarah's death, countless people have claimed to witness her apparition, often seen near Silver Lake, walking the trails, drifting along the shoreline, or standing motionless in the fog. Reports describe a headless white figure, or the sound of anguished cries echoing across the water. But as unsettling as these sightings may be, perhaps the most disturbing encounter with Sarah's ghost took place beneath the surface of the lake itself. In 2006, a young woman named Amanda and her boyfriend arrived at the small parking area near Silver Lake. It was a beautiful summer day, and they planned to spend the entire afternoon diving and swimming in the reservoir. Everything began normally enough. They soaked in the warm sun, splashed in the water, and eventually parted ways to explore the underwater world on their own. As Amanda paddled along in the dark blue water, she was surrounded by the strange calm that Silver Lake was known for. The reservoir sat cupped between two low ridges of pine and fir, their reflections stretching long and wavering across the surface like shadows trying to reach her. The water was unnaturally clear near the edges, but turned abruptly to ink as it deepened. A sharp gradient locals always said was just how Silver Lake is. Even the wind seemed to hesitate here, slipping over the treetops without disturbing the glassy surface for long. Then she heard it. A sound rippled through the water, a low gurgling groan, followed by the soft pop of escaping air bubbles. The noise reverberated in her ears, growing more distinct as she swam. She searched the darkening depths, the murky water pressing in around her. The groans shifted into moans, then into something like cries. somehow carried through the water despite the lack of air. Amanda spun in circles, trying to locate the source, but the sound seemed to come from everywhere at once. A sudden rush of bubbles rose toward the surface behind her. Amanda turned and saw the shape of a woman. She stood motionless at the bottom of the reservoir, only a few feet away. Her back was turned, long dark hair drifting around her head like strands of seaweed. She wore a pale white gown that glowed faintly in the dim light, and bubbles slipped from her form as the strangled moans continued to rise from the depths. Amanda froze. There was no way someone else could have entered the lake. They had been alone all day, and she was certain no one else had gone into the water. Yet here was a woman standing in the silt at the bottom of the man-made reservoir. She swam closer. The distressed sounds grew louder as she approached. Her boyfriend was nowhere in sight, and if this person needed help, Amanda felt she had no choice but to act. She kicked her feet harder, closing the distance until she was finally within reach. Then the woman slumped forward. Amanda's fear in that moment wasn't of ghosts or legends. She believed she was looking at a living person, someone inexplicably drowning in the depths of Silver Lake's serene waters. She reached out to grab the woman's shoulder, and the figure turned. What Amanda saw was something her mind struggled to comprehend. Where she expected to see terrified eyes staring back at her behind the tendrils of dark hair, there was nothing. The woman had no face, no eyes, no nose, no mouth with which to scream. Just a smooth, blank expanse of flesh where her features should have been. The shock sent Amanda scrambling upward, swimming as fast as she could. She broke the surface gasping, calling desperately for her boyfriend, who was already on the shore. He rushed to her, thinking she was injured. Through panicked tears, she told them what she had seen, that there was a woman at the bottom of the lake. Unsure what to believe, but wanting to calm her, he dove down to look for himself. But the drowning figure was gone, leaving no trace behind. When Amanda peered into the water again, she saw only the murky stillness. This is just one of many stories told by people who claim to have seen a ghostly figure in or near the lake. For many, the identity of the apparition seems obvious. The description matches Sarah closely. That belief was strengthened in the 1980s when a mother and daughter reported having strange dreams they believed were being channeled from Sarah Ware, pleading to be heard. Some say the faceless appearance makes sense. Sarah's head was separated from her body at the time of her burial, and for decades her skull remained apart from her remains. Perhaps her spirit is trapped in some kind of limbo beneath the glassy surface. And while the reservoir was filled after the pauper cemetery was relocated, record keeping at the time was poor to say the least. It's possible Sarah's body, or part of it, still lies somewhere beneath the lake bed. Others propose a different theory, one that reaches back before the reservoir or even the town existed. This region has been a place of mystery and legend since long before European settlement. Perhaps the apparition is not Sarah at all, but something far older. Something that has taken her form, or attempted to mimic it for reasons we will never understand. The truth is, we may never know what Amanda saw that day, just as we may never truly know what happened to Sarah Ware on that September night when she was brutally murdered. Such is the way of things here. So I want to know, what do you think? Is there an explanation for the decades of sightings and strange reports from Silver Lake? What waits below the water's surface? Does Sarah still linger in those dark depths, searching for justice? Or is something else wearing her shape